Hi, my name is James and I'm the Director of Communications and Engagement at CARE, and today I want to talk about human beings as stewards. Let me read Genesis 1:26-28. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and over all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." In this climactic action on the sixth day, God creates human beings. Verse 26 tells us they're made in God's own image and likeness. That means there's something godlike about them. It also teaches us that they are made to rule over the physical world that God has made. They're made to rule over the fish, the birds, livestock, and all wild animals as well. Verse 27 then teaches us that God created two sexes, male and female. They are equal, and together they are to show God's image in the world by being stewards. So having created human beings in his image, then in verse 28, what we read next is hugely important. We read that God blesses them. It would be easy to skip over this, but it's actually hugely significant theological idea. God's blessing is a smile upon them. It's a sign of his grace, and it's also a term that is covenant language. This is no surprise. Throughout the Bible, we see God entering into covenants with human beings, and even with the physical world, via its representative in Genesis 9, that's with Noah. Now, he's already said that humans are to rule, and in verse 28, we discover what that involves. Let me make two quick observations. The first thing is to say that being a steward is part of being an image bearer. In other words, being a steward is part of what it means to be human. It's a core part of who we are. It's not just some add-on. The fact that verse 28 comes so close to the teaching that we're made in God's image is hugely significant. And secondly, it's worth just saying it's an amazing thing that God, who's just made everything out of nothing simply by speaking, is kind enough to involve us in his work. It's a reminder of his love, but also his desire for a genuine, committed relationship with us. You see, God intended Adam and Eve to be his vice-regents, to rule under his authority. If we turn to Genesis 2:8, it says that God created a garden called Eden, and in verse 15 of the same chapter we read, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it." So the idea here is that Adam and Eve are to look after the garden that God has created, to care for it and to see it grow and expand. Now this brings us back to Genesis 1:28. Let me just read it again. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Now this verse has become known historically as the creation mandate, or more recently, the cultural mandate. Secondly, we should notice here that the creation mandate is a command. You can't minimize this. Human beings are to do the things that God has said. Their response must be one of obedience, and from the very beginning, obedience is at the heart of what following God and enjoying fellowship with him involves. Now, let's look at the individual elements of this mandate. Be fruitful and increase in number. Adam and Eve are to procreate and produce children who in turn must continue to fill the earth with image bearers until the earth is filled with the knowledge of God's glory as the waters cover the sea. Fill the earth and subdue it. So not only are they to procreate, but Adam and Eve and their posterity are to use their skills, talents, and wisdom to subdue the earth. Now I want you to notice here that part of being human, made in God's image, is that we are to work. We are to labor and steward the world around us. Notice they're to subdue both the physical world and the animal kingdom as well. So we've seen these two things. We've seen that ruling over the world is part of God's intended design for human beings, and it's part of our being his image bearers. We rule because God rules. Secondly, we are to work to subdue the earth around us, and this includes both the physical world and the animal kingdom as well. So now we need to ask, well, what does that look like? You only have to look around you to see the amazing ways humans have obeyed this mandate. You've taken the underground, you got on a bus, on an aeroplane, incredible feats of buildings in your area, engineering works that span the globe, the development of new technologies and advances in medicine and industry and finance, the list is endless. But of course, we also have to acknowledge that we don't actually have full dominion, do we? Nature sometimes overpowers us. We don't have full control over the animal kingdom. As we'll look at in subsequent episodes, this problem is our sin and our selfishness. It's called the fall. But it is fascinating in Psalm 8 that David picks up this idea of the creation mandate. And in Psalm 8, verses 5 to 8, we read this: "You've made them, humans, a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet." That's a position of absolute victory and dominion. "All flocks and herds, the animals of the wild, the birds in the sky, the fish in the sea, all that swim the paths of the seas." Now, it's really obvious that David, who wrote that psalm, is thinking of Genesis 1, 26 to 28. The language is so similar. But the psalm suggests that God has put everything under our feet. And as we've already seen, that's simply not the case. We don't have full dominion. Human beings don't rule the world perfectly. The earth is not filled with the knowledge of God's glory. So how do we square this? Well, if you turn to Hebrews 2, verses 8 to 9, you'll read this: "In putting everything under them, God left nothing that is not subject to them. Yet at present, we do not see everything subject to them. But we do see Jesus, who was made lower than the angels for a little while, now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone." Notice especially, at present we do not see everything subject to them. The original design for humans to exercise dominion was frustrated by the fall and by sin. But the glorious, incredible, life-changing news in verse 9, where we read, "But we do see Jesus." Jesus is the second Adam. He's the one who succeeds, and by his death and resurrection, he institutes a new world order where the original plan for the world will be fulfilled. Thanks to Jesus, the world is being progressively filled with the knowledge of God's glory as the waters cover the sea. And in the meantime, until Jesus comes back, we work as stewards under King Jesus, empowered by his Spirit, seeking to make a difference in this world by being light and salt.